Daniel never ceases to impress me with his eloquence. I get embarrassed talking after him, even though I'm 3 times as old as he is.
Really appreciate you doing it.
I'm having to roll with the punches a little bit in some ways by adjusting the speaker lineup. And I think I'd like to ask Guy Giorno and David Kilgore to come up. Guy, I think neither of them probably needs much introduction, but Guy Giorno was the Chief of Staff of Stephen Harper at one point. So what we're trying to do by inviting David and Guy here is to have a multi-partisan conversation here. This isn't just about the NDP and the Greens. Proportional representation is something that's important to all citizens. If you happen to be a Conservative right now in the Atlantic provinces, well, your vote didn't count. If you're a Conservative in Toronto, your vote doesn't count. So, I mean, it affects everybody. It doesn't just affect the smaller parties. It affects everybody at one time or another. So we're going to hear from Guy first, and then I'll come back to the mic and introduce David Kilgore.
Thank you very much. Speaking after Daniel is quite an act to follow. And I think I saw the Raging Grannies taking a photo of me on the same platform as them. I actually took a picture of you on the same platform as me just a few minutes ago, so I feel the same. My name is Guy Giorno. I am nonpartisan now because of an appointment I've taken to adjudicate municipal ethics in a few communities in Ontario, but I've spent more than 3 decades as a member of the Conservative movement. I've served as the longest Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. I chaired the Conservative Party's election campaign in 2011 and again in 2015. Though I'm nonpartisan now, I see nothing wrong, and in fact I continue to be committed to the cause of electoral form and proportional representation. And I don't see my nonpartisan status as excluding that, because I believe that nothing should be more nonpartisan than the issue of a fair and representative and democratic electoral system. And in fact, so my message to members of my former party, the Conservative Party, is the same as my message to members of all parties, and my message to people who are not members of any party, and that is that the choice of an electoral system should not, must not, cannot be based on the self-interest of any political party. It must only be based on what is good and right and proper for all Canadians.
Hey, got it.
And for too long, and you know, the news media are part of this problem. They analyze PR by saying, well, under a PR system, this party would go up and that party would go down, this party would stay the same.
It's the wrong way to do it.
It's the wrong way to do it, of course, because we don't judge our democratic institutions based on whether they work for a party that's yellow or purple or brown or red or yellow or orange or green. Or blue. Did I miss blue? Blue, or blue. The only test of a system is whether a collective assembly, right, a collective parliament, the House of Commons, the House of the People, the People's House, represents the views and the values and the interests and the ideas and the ideals of Canadians in direct proportion to their numbers. When you think of it that way, there is in fact no other argument.
No argument!
Nothing is more logical. And nothing is more illogical, and nothing is more pernicious than a system that allows a minority to govern with a false majority. Now, I used to say as a Conservative, I'm used to being a minority, you know, Conservatives are used to being a minority in Canada, but the reality is, when you look at all of us with different views and aspirations and values and ideas and cultures and backgrounds and experiences, everybody in Canada belongs to a minority.
Yes.
And what better system to reflect and to represent and protect the rights of a minority than a proportional system where our parliament reflects our makeup in direct proportion to our numbers. And my message to Conservatives remains the same as to every other party. You can as the Conservative Party has done for time, chase a false majority at every election and govern some of the time, or compete in a fair system and be represented in direct proportion to your numbers fairly all of the time. We hear trotted out from time to time this argument that nothing could be more foreign to Canada, foreign to our Westminster system of parliamentary democracy than this foreign concept of PR. And yet, let's look at what the Westminster system is supposed to stand for, what we're taught in school it stands for. It stands for the proposition that the Commons is supreme, that the executive, the cabinet, is accountable to the people's representatives, and that's our system. And yet, what is the reality of the Westminster system in Canada, not only in this House, but in all the provinces? It is that far from the executive being accountable to the legislative branch, the executive being accountable to Parliament, the executive dominates the House of Commons. Far from debate in the House of Commons being meaningful, debate in the House of Commons is theater, superficial. Votes are a foregone conclusion and a rubber stamp, and committees hardly act to hold the government to account.
Well, that wasn't supposed to happen.
It wasn't supposed to happen. And I put forward the proposition that all these failings, which I call the distortion, the bastardization of the principles of the Westminster system, can be laid at the doorstep of false majorities produced by a first-past-the-post system. It is first-past-the-post and false majorities that has corrupted the Westminster ideal, and it is proportional representation that will revive and save it. I'll end very soon. There's so much misinformation out there. It's so easy to distort our position. PR, as we said, proportional representation is not a system. It's a principle. It's a principle that can be achieved by many systems. It's the principle of proportionality, a principle that Canadians, when they're asked, agree with. And that principle can be achieved as simply, or it can be achieved through many means, as simply in Baden-Württemberg, by marking one X on one ballot in one district. You can get proportional outcomes with the right system, or it can be anything like that. So we can't allow, or continue to allow, others to mischaracterize this important principle, overcomplicate it,
It's not
district.
complicated.
Not at all.
That's right.
Fairness is not a complicated principle, and fairness is the principle. So I'll close by simply noting that this principle of fairness and proportionality, is the principle that Canadians themselves adopt and endorse and support. And all members of parties, whether they're elected or activists in political parties, should do not what's right for the interests of their political parties, act not out of self-interest, but act out of the greater interest of all Canadians.
Don't you love this guy? Thank you so much, guys. I think Guy puts the lie to a preconception that many people have that conservatives don't want PR. This is not so. And it's not so when you look at the polls either. Conservatives, Liberals, NDP, Green supporters, Canadian citizens across the political spectrum want their votes to count wherever they vote, whoever they vote for. So this is not a partisan issue. I'd like to pass the mic over to somebody